This is an overview of the final exam study guide. There are only 3 questions from the last 3 chapters that you covered. Question 1 asks you to discuss how associational life has reflected racial segregation in America and how labor unions and ethnic and national groups have responded differently to racial discrimination. For this part of the prompt, you're going to want to make sure that you're focusing on how we see racial segregation reflected not just in communities, but also in the various organizations or associations that people belong to, including, of course, labor unions, ethnic groups that people belong to, Knights of Columbus, say, which is an Italian-American organization, and others. And then, of course, there are national groups such as the ACLU or political groups, the National Democratic Party, the National Republican Party, etc. How do we see the racial segregation that is in residential areas reflected in other parts of community? That's what you want to focus on in this particular part of the prompt. And of course, you also want to discuss how different ethnic groups responded. What kind of groups did they create as a result of being banned or prevented from joining certain groups? Okay, so you want to talk about all of that. Explain the racial disparities in civil participation between whites and non-whites. All right, so again, there's some information in the text about how whites and other groups of color participate differently in organizations or associations. So focus on explaining what the studies tell us. Why are people of color less likely to participate in voluntary organizations and community activities? Again, look at the information in the text. There are ideas that the authors suggest about why people of color may, in fact, participate at lower rates. Do any of these ideas about associational life help to explain your participation or lack of involvement? Okay, so now this is just about you. Think about groups or organizations that you belong to, maybe on campus, maybe in your community. You could include, of course, your religious organization if you belong to one. Are you very involved, a little bit involved, not involved at all? Why do you think that is? Do any of the ideas that are in the text about why people don't participate resonate or fit your situation? After learning about associational life, will you be more or less likely to join or participate in these activities? Why or why not? Again, this is just about you. That is from chapter 9. The second question is from chapter 11. Discuss the differences between color blindness and cosmopolitanism. Okay. Do you agree with the authors of the text that neither one of these concepts is a helpful way of viewing society? So the authors of the text explain what color blindness is as well as cosmopolitanism. They also detail their ideas about why these two concepts are not very useful. Explain that, and then explain whether you agree with them. If you don't, that's fine. Tell me why. If you do, tell me why. Explain the argument the authors of the text make regarding why the racial democracy approach should be used and discuss your view of their arguments. Again, racial democracy approach is something the authors of the text argue we should strive to do or implement. Why do they argue that? And what's your view of their arguments? Do you agree with them? Explain why. If you do not agree with them, explain why. Consider this situation. You are visiting a friend or significant other, and a family member makes an anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish, racist, or homophobic remark. And everyone, including your friend or significant other, laughs. Discuss what you would say or do and explain why. All right, so this is a tough one, but put some thought into it and explain what you would say or do. Finally, discuss one or two things you learned in this course that you would use in your work, school, and personal relationships, and how you will apply these concepts. Don't just say, well, yeah, I learned about racial democracy and I learned about intersectionality. How will these help you in your relationships at work, school, or personal? And how will you apply them? How will you use them? That's the important piece too. Finally, question 3 is from chapter 10. Here, discuss divorce, single motherhood, and out of wedlock births. So you got to discuss all 3. Explain the effects on families. Okay, so for each one, explain the effects of divorce, of single motherhood, and out of wedlock births. Do not just say divorce, single motherhood, and out of wedlock births are bad for families. Families suffer. That is true. But explain each one of those concepts. Explain what your family taught you about people different from you. What did your family teach you? All of us learn things from our family about people who are different from us, whether people have a different religion or are from a different social class or are of a different ethnicity or a different race, etc. What did your family teach you about people who are different from yourself? Are there any ideas that you were taught that you have worked to change? Explain. Tell us why. Tell me why. If you have yet to seek to change any of the ideas you learned, explain why not. Maybe after you've explained what your family taught you, you feel as though what they taught you were some good things. And so why are those good things? Discuss the problems with identity made by the authors of the text. In fact, the section toward the end of the chapter is called The Problem with Identity. Provide details in your discussion and explain whether you agree with them about identity and the problems with identity. That's it. As always, I'm sure those of you who study and make an outline will do well. People who kind of wing it, maybe less so, but I wish you well in your preparation.